I think I was brought to their attention first and foremost because of my hairstyle, my unique hairstyle, and the fact that I was playing in the Premier League. Then it became very sinister, and the fact that you're ridiculing someone on a regular basis. I wasn't the only player that they did that to, but then you want to compound the fact that you're black facing, and it was a different period then where humour, banter, a lot of it was accepted by a lot of people. There wasn't anything I could really do to intervene. If you spoke out about it, people would say you're being soft, get on with it. What's the problem? Haven't you got a sense of humour? So I kind of grew up in an environment where you couldn't really talk about anything like that anyways.
Hello and welcome to When Football Began Again, the podcast that's willfully avoiding FFP charges on its way to world dominance. Today's show is an in-depth chat with former Premier League striker, star of the 90s, one of the most recognisable faces in football at that time, albeit perhaps sometimes for the wrong reasons. We talk about that in a great deal of depth. It is Jason Lee, the Nottingham Forest striker. Wonderful, wonderful guy. Really, really interesting chat. All of that is coming up in a moment. Before then, thank you to everybody who watched or listened to Jules Warren's show last week. Really nice to have Jules on the show. I'm actually pre-recording this before that show's gone out, so I don't quite know what the response to that has been, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be great. Jules Warren is one of the nicest guys in football, and if you're back listening after that show, thank you very much for coming back. All of the links you need for today's show to watch or listen, to share the show, to leave a review are in the description, as well as a link to Jason Lee's podcast, the Absolute Lee podcast, something that I accidentally say quite a bit. I say the word absolutely quite a few times. I had no idea that I did this. I'm subliminally like kind of promoting his podcast throughout most of this episode, which he does mention at the end. But let's get on with it. Jason Lee, really lovely guy, and someone who really went through the ringer in the 90s, long before kind of all of the supporter care was around, footballers and all of that kind of additional support. Footballers in the 90s, I think, were just kind of thrust into the spotlight, and Jason Lee, as a very young player, was thrust into the spotlight in a very unwelcome way. We talk about that. We talk about his rise through the league ladder. We talk about his career today and how that's been influenced by his life experiences. It's a brilliant chat. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So here we go. This is my chat with Jason Lee. Jason Lee. Jason, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good, Carl. Listen, looking forward to having our conversation and a little catch up. So nice to meet you.
You too. An absolute pleasure to have you on. Well, I mean, the first thing I've got to say, I've got to stop being surprised by how fantastic professional athletes are still looking sort of 20 years later. I don't really know why. I've still not quite got that in my head yet, that's what happens. But you're looking good. You're a regular at the City Ground still as well, of course, aren't you?
Yeah, you say that. That's not always the case with former athletes. I mean, I think a lot of pros, when they finish, some just don't want to do anything ever again. Some pros have to be kind of forced to actually do the work even during their career. But yeah, for me, I try to maintain and keep moving and just look after myself. Although I'm complaining about my back today, I'm generally in good health. Just normal ailments that you get from wear and tear of being a sportsman and playing for a long period of time. But yes, I go to Forest games. I've got an ambassadorial role at the club, so I tend to visit and go to as many home games as possible.
Nice. And yeah, things have been pretty good in the last couple of years. We'll come to that as well. We're going to go back to the start of your career, though. We'll come to your playing career in a moment. You were born in London in 1971. At which point in your childhood did maybe people around you realise that you had this sporting talent, and how did that kind of transpire then in academies and such like?
I played sports like most children. It wasn't until the age of 10 that I went to my first Sunday league team, really. I was in the school teams. My mum took me to my first team to play in. They put me in goal. As you do, I suppose you're a new person to the side. You have to prove yourself. So I started off in goal, and then it didn't take long for me to work my way kind of up the pitch. Really, played in defence, played in midfield, played striker. But I was with that team for a couple of years before I moved on to a few other better Sunday League sides. Really, and it wasn't really until 16 or just before 16, which you can get a scholarship. Back in the day, it was a YTS youth training scheme that I was picked up by a professional club, which was really frustrating because I felt that I was good enough. And the academy systems wasn't like they are now, where you get drawn in, at the age of 6 or 7 or whatever it may be, and then have a long period of time in an academy. But there were people that I was playing with at school and in Sunday league sides that were at clubs, so I felt I was good enough, but it just didn't happen. My local club, closest club to me, would have been Leighton Orient. We played all our cup finals on the pitch, on the main pitch at Brisbane Road. Some of my teammates were at Leighton Orient and Tottenham and wherever it may be, and I was probably one of the last ones really to get picked up. But we had some good players out of my school and my Sunday league sides. Myself, Jonathan Goodman, who was an Irish international Republic, played for Millwall. He also played. Who else did he play for? Wimbledon. He played for Wimbledon in the Premier League. There was Bobby Barry, who played for Crystal Palace in the Premier League. So we had a number of players. There was a few a year younger, a few a year older, who went on to have decent careers. You think you're good enough, but it's about opportunity and getting scouted really, and being in the right place at the right time. I liked athletics. I liked basketball. I played all sports. Football wasn't my main interest, but I just tended to play a lot of sports, and every day after school I was invariably doing something. Whether it be a school team or an after school club.
And then eventually Charlton, I think, are the side that pick you up, and at that point you're sent out on loan as well to Stockport, eventually moved to Lincoln City, where your career really begins to take off as well there in 1991. What is that like as a young player? I suppose you get that move to Charlton, you're being sent, Charlton to Stockport's one hell of a big change, I imagine, leaving London and moving that far north as well. So is that quite a difficult period in your career when you're really trying to make it? I imagine self-belief is a huge part of getting through that.
I talk to a lot of young players about this all the time, really, in terms of you never know where it's going to take you and some of the sacrifices you have to make, and invariably you have to put yourself in uncomfortable situations sometimes. So I went in at Charlton at 16, signed my scholarship, made my debut in the first team at 17. So things snowballed really quickly. And you mentioned Stockport as being a loan spell, but that wasn't my first loan spell. My first loan spell would have been the conference, with a manager called Malcolm Allison, who was a legendary figure in football. He managed Man City and Crystal Palace. And he came down to the training ground and he was watching me play in the reserves. As I mentioned, I played in the first team at 17, and I was frustrated. I made my debut at 17. I've only been in the pro game for a year, and I want to play more first team games. So for me to be kicking my heels in the youth team and the reserves, which is a good standard back, especially in those days, those that wasn't playing in the first team would play in the reserves, midweek or whatever it may be. So you had a really good core of players, and you could really accelerate your career with that in that respect. So for me, it was a good education. I learned very quickly. Malcolm Allison took me on loan to a team called Fisher Athletic, who was playing in the conference then, and obviously they've gone out of the game. I think they went into administration and wound up or whatever it may be. But that's in the Rotherhithe area of London. And I did a month there, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Malcolm Allison, I learned a lot from him in that short period of time. I knew what he stood for and what he was about in terms of how he was perceived in football. And that for me was great. It gave me the confidence I needed. When I went back to Charlton, again, I felt I needed to go out and play first team football as opposed to playing in the reserves and youth team. And then Stockport, yeah, that was an opportunity for me to go out to Stockport, which would have been in my second year, my second scholarship, the second year of my scholarship. So I'd have been probably 18 when I went out the second time. And that was difficult because being a London boy, the only time I ventured out of London would have been probably on a coach with the team to go and play football. So for me to land in Stockport on a month's loan, the weather was terrible, snow. I had to live in digs with some other young pros, which was really weird because I didn't go in digs as a youth team player. A lot of young players actually go into digs, but I didn't want to go into digs. Being an East London boy travelling over to South London for Charlton, I really didn't want to be staying over there longer than I needed to. I thoroughly enjoyed my month, even though, as I said, the conditions wasn't great. and it looked like I was going to sign for them, but I actually signed for Lincoln City instead of signing for Stockport, and I actually didn't go back to Charlton after my loan spell at Stockport. I signed for Steve Thompson, who was my teammate at Charlton Athletic, who was a captain at Charlton, who was playing in the reserves with me at Charlton, who got the player manager role at Lincoln, and you can see how things work in football. So
Mm.
he took me to Lincoln, and that was really the start of my development and my career, where I was able to get a lot of games under my belt at a young age.
You score a lot of goals at Lincoln, which eventually then attracts the interest of Southend United as well, who then take you on there in the second tier. So again, you're working your way up through the league ladder at this stage, still in your early 20s at this point. And then Nottingham Forest, of course, then basically sign you as well. When did you become aware that Forest were interested in you? And again, what are those sort of decisions like? What goes into that decision how does that work when a side like Forest approach you in the mid-90s?
Things can happen very quickly. So, as I alluded to earlier, when I speak to young players, if you get the opportunity to go out on loan and go and get first team football, it's imperative that you go and do that, because some players will sit there at an academy. It's very comfortable, especially if they're Premier League, and play development football, which is what it is now, under 21s, under 23s. And it's very sanitized. It's very comfortable. There's not 3 points at the end of the day. They're encouraged to go and play through the thirds. It's all pretty football. I've coached for 10 years, so I know what coaching's about. You're encouraged to just go and play and be comfortable. So when someone says, "Do you want to go out on loan and do you want to travel to the other end of the country?" invariably, a lot of these guys will say, "No, that's not really something I want to do." And it's not an easy decision to make. But when I went to Lincoln, I played 90 plus league games over a few years, scored some goals. At the age of 19 to 21, I think if you're a young player and you've played a lot of games, that is going to bring you to the attention of people. It's myself, there was Dion Dublin, Julian Jotum, lots of young players, lots of young strikers who were playing first team football, who would, and I can remember the names and the clubs. And also with the connection of Nottingham Forest, Lincoln's not too far from Nottingham Forest, and we would play reserve games and behind closed doors friendlies. So I was playing against Forest and Notts County and teams in and around the Midlands. So they would have had an understanding of who I was and what I was doing, and the fact that I was playing first team football at that age, which would have been something that their younger players wouldn't have been doing. And it happened quickly. So in the March, no, at the end of the season, 2 seasons at Lincoln, end of the season, I had the opportunity really to step up. Steve Thompson had a connection with Colin Murphy, who's a former Lincoln legend and manager. He was director of football at Southend, and the newly appointed manager was Barry Fry, who I knew, who had been playing against whilst he was at Barnet, and always did well against Barnet, always scored goals throughout my career against Barnet and his teams. So he knew what I was about. So there was a connection there. Barry was very good with his networking and his scouting with lower league players. Myself, Tommy Mooney, he signed Tommy Mooney from Scarborough. He signed myself. Brett Angel was still there. Southend was a championship club now, playing in the first division or Division 2 then, with the different formats. And they'd sold Stan Collymore to Nottingham Forest, who was at Palace, whilst I was at Charlton. Frank Clark was at Leyton Orient as director of football and then manager. So you can see the connections of how people know people. So he knew myself, he knew me and Stan, and he knew some players like Kevin Campbell, who took on loan from Arsenal. You could see where things may have come about, and when coaches and managers say, "I remember you here, there, and everywhere," I always say to young players, you never know who's watching, because that's literally what happened when I was playing certain games. Certain coaches and managers was watching, and they knew what I was about. So very quickly, I went from Lincoln to Southend, and then March of the same season, Nottingham Forest came in for me, and I ended up going to Forest as well. Forest was playing in the same division as Southend, having been relegated the year before. It was Brian Clough's last year. So I was part of a promotion with Nottingham Forest, from March to the end of the season, which culminated with us getting promotion at Peterborough, another one of my former clubs. You can see how things can happen very quickly. Literally played for three teams over the course of a year, whether it be Lincoln, Southend, and then Nottingham Forest, and the jump. So I certainly felt like I was ready for it. I did my apprenticeship and did the hard due, and travelled the miles and did what I had to do, and plied my trade at all levels of the game. So yeah, it was fantastic when Forest were a big club, very established Premier League club. When they show interest, it was a no-brainer really that you're going to take the opportunity.
And having worked through all levels of the game in such quick pace, I mean, what were the kind of differences from playing at fourth tier when you're at Bank versus when you're making your debut in the Premier League for Forest? Like, what are the principal differences between the opponents you're coming up against?
Physicality and mentality. You know, the lower league is more physical. I mean, even now, it's still going to be more physical if a Premier League team plays a League Two team in an FA Cup tie, whatever it may be. Yeah, you're not going to compete playing the same style of football, are you? But even League Two sides now do tend to play more football, and they will still try and play out. You know, the keeper will roll it out, and this, that, and the other. I would say it's physicality, and as I went up the leagues, I found the game actually easier in terms of not having to get embroiled in battles physically. It was more about, what you're going to do when you've got the ball. Players are smarter. They'll have a little look at you. They might drop off, and you don't really get into those same physical battles. So for me, the step up wasn't too difficult. You're judged then on your quality and how consistent can you be, at that top level, because the best players play at the top level for a longer period of time for a reason. They're very consistent day in, day out, and they're able to produce.
You assist big money signing Brian Roy, I think, for the winner. It's only Premier League debut you assisted Brian Roy though, didn't you?
Yeah, Stan was missing for the opening day, and we played Ipswich away, and myself and Brian Roy up top. And yeah, I got the assist, I got the flick on Brian Roy, fantastic finish from distance. I think we won 1-0 away at Ipswich. So that was set us up. We was up and running for the Premier League campaign. And I think the next game, which I wasn't happy about, but I was dropped. He didn't say I was dropped, but Stan was fit. He put Stan up top with Brian Roy, and it was Manchester United live on TV. And to be fair to Stan, he scored, had a great game, but I was kicking my heels on the bench because nobody wants to be on the bench, and especially against Manchester United.
No, absolutely, and obviously, it's an incredible first season back in the top flight for Forest. I mean, obviously, finishing third that season, you play a huge part in that. It is yourself, Stan, and Brian Roy who are the three main strikers in that team. I mean, if they had obviously a little bit of a partnership going on as well, I think, during that season. How does that work? How competitive is it in training and so on? Because clearly you're all teammates, you want the team to do well, but as you say, you're a striker, you're on the bench, you want to be on the pitch. So how does that work psychologically, and does that just depend on the individuals and characters involved?
I mean, the squads are bigger now, so you've got that problem. I mean, Premier League and Championship, they'll have squads of 25, but they've probably got 60 pros on the books because under 21s, under 23s, and scholars as well. So there's a lot of numbers, and there's a lot to deal with, and you've got to believe in yourself. When I first went in at Charlton, having not been in an academy and this that, and the other from the age of 16, as soon as I went in, my vision was I want to be in the first team. I don't really want to be on this pitch. I want to be on that pitch where the first team players are. So only 11 can play. So I'd be literally kicking everybody to try and get over there, because if there's an opportunity, you want to leave your mark. So that always remained and stayed with me throughout my career. So the year we got promoted and was back in the Premier League with Forest, I wasn't happy being second fiddle and being on the bench. But Stan produced. He scored 25 goals. He played a big part in the fact that Forest attained third place alongside Brian. Great partnership. Big money was spent on Brian to bring him to the club, and I was third choice, which in hindsight is not the worst thing. Brian Moore was a Dutch international, played in the World Cup. That's where we signed him off the back of that. Stan was obviously a prodigious talent, and we all know what Stan could do. He was a fantastic player, but for me, if you've got that ambition, you still want to play. So I was never satisfied with being a substitute. I don't think you should ever be satisfied, but I was always a good professional, always trained. I didn't sulk. I would kick people. Don't get me wrong. I would kick people because frustration can come out now and again. But I tried to be a good squad player. I got the tag of being a super sub in that season, which ask any player, they don't want to be known as a super sub. But I was coming off the bench and I was making an impact and I was scoring some goals. But that was just my frustration. I didn't want to be a sub. I wanted to start and play. So yeah, I played my part that season, but it wasn't until Stan moved on the following season, that he went to Liverpool, that I really got my break and a run in the team. So, I tried to take that, and I had a really good spell, and I did grab that when the opportunity came.
Absolutely, and obviously with finishing third in the league, which is still the joint best finish since Clubby's European Cup winners for the club. You're in the UEFA Cup as you defeat Malmo, Auxerre, Lyon. There's a quarter-final defeat to Bayern Munich. One hell of a run, which I know is still fondly remembered at the City Ground. I mean, is there ever a moment for you where you're lining up against Bayern Munich that you pinch yourself and go, wow, it was only a few years ago I was at Sinsel Bank? Like, that is an incredible kind of rise, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was the other games really before then. I mean, Auxerre, you got Laurent Blanc, when he played for Manchester United, captain France. There's Taribo West, who played for Derby County. And there were some really good players along the way. And we really acquitted ourselves. We was the last English team left in Europe that season. But all the other sides, bearing in mind, we've only just been promoted and, kind of trying to re-establish ourselves as a Premier League side. So we performed really well. The games were really tight. There wasn't really many opportunities to score goals, low scoring games, until we got to the quarterfinals where we met Bayern Munich. And I played every game that I was fit. The games I didn't play in Europe, I mean, I think I started 6. The games I didn't play, I was injured. And that was only Lyon, I believe, at home, where I was out injured for about a month, really. So I really couldn't expect to go back into the team. And the Bayern Munich game, I didn't start the away leg, which was the first leg, and we got beat 2-1. Steve Chettle scored, which gave us slim hope, really, of bringing him back to the City Ground and maybe, overturning that. But no, we got spanked at home against Bayern Munich. I think it's 5-1. I was on the bench that day, on the bench for both games. But I got on in the second leg. Got an assist for Steve Stone to score. But, they had Klinsmann. I don't know if it was Papin, but they had some incredible players, Bayern Munich, and they was obviously more experienced at that level. So it ran away from us, but we was very proud of what we did, and we still have get-togethers and reunions, and we celebrate the fact that it's been a long time since Forest played in Europe, and for them to get third place in the Premier League would be a fantastic achievement.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a newly promoted side as well, even more impressive. The 95-96 season is also the most prolific for you in a Forest shirt. Obviously, the transfer of Stan to Liverpool offers more opportunities. You take your chance. In the autumn of 1995, you actually score 6 goals in 7 Premier League games. Almost all of them are either decisive or points-winning goals as well, including a brace against Man City. Again, that kind of for fans, we know and understand from, and even from the amateur game, like sort of feeling a run of confidence, a run of goals. You're in the Premier League, scoring 6 goals in 7 Premier League games. Are you just going out there just with your head going, I'm going to score today? Is that confidence just through the roof? What is psychologically happening when you're in a hot run of form like that?
I think once you start scoring, you do believe in yourself, and that confidence will come. So, my career, I've always managed to score goals. I've never been a prolific goal scorer, and the reason being is, like myself and Stan, although we may well be the same size, we play the game in a different way. I'm a number 9, or an old school number 9, who would be quite selfless in the way I'd play. I would invariably have to go back for a lot of set pieces and go back with centre halves, and they'd probably take turns. So I'd be going back with, each and every other for long throw-ins and free kicks and corners, and that would impact my game anyway, in terms of, you want to be at the top end and you only want to be attacking. But I was never selfish, and managers and coaches always believed that I could do a job defensively to support the team. So I had my moments. When I was younger, I would score loads of goals. When you're free of responsibility, Sunday league or grassroots youth team, yeah, I just would go out and enjoy the game, and I wouldn't have these responsibilities. But when you're playing first team football, you have roles to play in a team, and my role was always to be a good team player, help the team out defensively, hold the ball up, contribute to goals if and when I could, and just play my role. So for me, yeah, that run, and we was quite forward thinking in the way we played as well. We'd play with a number 10, or we'd play with 5 in midfield and 1 striker. So Stan was very good at doing that on his own when he played up there. When I played up there, my role would have been to retain the ball and bring other players into play, like Brian Roy, Lars Bohinen, Steve Stoney, and Wone. Just have people making runs beyond you. Third man runs. So your role is really to retain the ball and look after the ball. And if you can get to the byline and get crosses in, that would have been one of my strengths. You know, heading the ball was one of my strengths. So if we could get up the pitch and get into the final third and deliver good balls into the box, I'd have a opportunity to go and score a goal. So the run of games came. My first goal that season would have been Everton at home. That set me off really. You know, man of the match performance. I think we won 3-1 that day, and then I was able to build momentum. And yeah, the Man City game where I got two at home. You just feel like, you know, while you're in form, the team trusts you a little bit more. You're prepared to take more chances and more risks, because that can be the thing as a striker sometimes. Is when you're not in form, you're not prepared to take shots and take chances. All strikers miss opportunities. It's about being ready for the next one. So no, I had that run, 6 and 7. Not many people know that or realise that. You know, at any level that's good, but in the Premier League to do that, you know, then it was a bit of a, I think it was a record for a long period of time. It was myself and Mark Steen who's playing at Chelsea. I think he did the same. He might have got 6 and 6, something like that. It's only now that you got the phenomenons in Erling Haaland and other such like, where these players can literally go on serious runs and score a lot of goals. So no, I'm really proud of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it is around the same time you find yourself in the crosshairs of a Baddiel and Skinner Fantasy Football League sketch. It's something that they both now acknowledge was racist and bullying in its nature. It's broadcast to a late night TV audience of football fans. Now, this is the 90s, so it's not a trending topic on Twitter. It's not something you can put into YouTube, but it kind of has this kind of cult fan base of football fans. When did you first become aware that that was going on?
As soon as I started watching the program, like most footballers, especially then, we watch a lot of Match of the Day, Football Focus. There was less football programs to watch, so something like Fantasy Football League, which used to come on a Friday evening, prime time really, I think 9 p.m. BBC Two, it had a large audience. So you know, like most people, if I wasn't watching it, people would tell me to watch it. So it wasn't like I was going to get away from watching what's happening on the program. And I think I was brought to their attention first and foremost because of my hairstyle, my unique hairstyle, and the fact that I was playing in the Premier League. Then it became very sinister, and the fact that, you know, you're ridiculing someone on a regular basis. I wasn't the only player that they did that to, but then you want to compound the fact that you're black facing, and it was a different period then where humor, banter, a lot of it was accepted by a lot of people. You know, there wasn't anything I could really do to intervene. If you spoke out about it, people would say you're being soft, get on with it. You know, what's the problem? Haven't you got a sense of humor? So I kind of grew up in an environment where you couldn't really talk about anything like that anyway. So I just wanted to work through it, do the best I can. But you know, I accept that if it wasn't for the fact that I was playing Premier League football, that I wouldn't have been on their radar. And it, you know, it did take a long time for Badil, especially, to admit that, yeah, they overstepped the mark. You know, Frank Skinner's also accepted that, but it's not just those. I hold BBC to account. I hold, you know, the organisation. I do a lot of work around, yeah, ED&I, talking to people about what they can do in terms of creating a culture, inclusive environment. And you know, you like to think these things are not going to be accepted in today's society. We know things still continue to happen, but it was just it was just a period of time that we were kind of brought up in, where a lot of TV programs and a lot of humor and a lot of overt racism was allowed to flourish, really. So yeah, I think that's where that period came from. But for me, it was about working my way through it and trying to come out the other side.
And as you mentioned, I mean, you've very recently come face to face with David Baddiel for your own podcast, the Absolutely podcast. I mean, it's an absolutely intriguing episode. It's really, really powerful, obviously. And I mean, you don't let him off the hook in any way in terms of just holding him to account for that, and nor should you. What was that like for you, I guess, having that conversation, coming face to face with him, and what impacts did it have on your life?
It's a good word, right? Absolutely, because you even use that word when you're describing it. Yeah, I mean, the conversation had to be had because lots of people was talking about the sketch, and you know, for the past 25 years, and I'd always get roped into this conversation, but I wasn't on social media. It's only been the last few years that I've joined social media. I've done a lot of work trying to defend players, you know, and speaking to social media companies about this stuff. The online harms bill that we're waiting to hear, you know, that's going to get released imminently, and we want to know where they're going to go with protecting people with online abuse. But the conversation was long overdue, and I made the point that it could have contacted me. They could have contacted me at any stage. People write to me, people get in touch with me. I just feel that we got to this stage because it was inevitable that for anybody to continue, especially Baddiel, who wants to talk about anti-Semitism, he's out there talking about culturally from his own perspective. You want people to listen and you want people to have a better understanding. So he explains that he has a better understanding. And generally that's the way it works is when once somebody's been subject to some sort of abuse, they then have more empathy and they can understand, how maybe somebody else felt. And I think once it started happening to him, being a football fan, being Jewish, going to games, listening to certain chants, that it started to resonate. And he thought, hold on a minute, this is not very comfortable. It's not very nice. So yeah, we had a grown up conversation. It had to be said, face to face. It wasn't about doing it online and letting other people speak. And people can take away from that conversation whatever they want, really. It was, for me, it was a learning piece. People keep talking about education and learning. The reason I did the podcast is to afford people and give them an opportunity to speak and share their stories. And I do a lot of restorative work with people anyway. So if people make mistakes and they're genuine and they want to come back from it, then you've got to show them and work with them and give them the tools and the understanding for them to be able to do that. So, fair play to David. He was brave enough to come on and sit in front of me. If that conversation would have took place 10 years before or 20 years before, I'm not sure I would have been in the right frame, right headspace to be able to sit down and listen to what he had to say. So,
Mm.
we evolve and we move forward.
Yeah, it is a fascinating conversation, and yeah, the way that you put across, I think the impact that had is really well worth listening to. I'll put the link to that episode
Appreciate that.
in the description for this. I think the other thing about it was as well that it was the bullying element as well, which you do cover, which was unfairly singling you out as well as missing chances. We've already covered you're in the hottest streak of your career. Your game actually is more than about just goals. You've then spoken about how you probably felt a bit frustrated that maybe because then your form dipped a little, as it does for any player, the manager maybe took you out of the spotlight. You maybe felt that was part of it. I mean, is that something that you look back on now and think, perhaps if you'd have had a different run of form after that hot streak, had all that not been happening, things would have been slightly different?
I don't think I was ever going to outrun the chant and the momentum it built. I've never been able to outrun that chant. To this day, I still deal with the microaggressions off the back of people who meet me, and there's people who don't even know where the chant evolved from, where it stemmed from, who sing it. So I'll never outrun that. But I think when you're playing, as I said, the manager Frank Clark, he was brilliant to me. He's got responsibility to the team and the club. So he's going to pick players who are in form and he wants to win games of football. So I understand that. And also, as I said, there was nothing in place in terms of what do we do to support somebody who's maybe going through this. There are more and more people, pastoral care at football clubs. You've got well-being officers and people, psychologists, people there doing the work. They wasn't doing that in my time. So he had a responsibility to the club. And my form, did dip. If I was scoring every week and continued to score, he's not going to leave me out the side, is he? So I had a period. So for me, kicking my heels, not being able to play, certainly didn't help me. But I can understand from his perspective, you know, why he would pick the best players available for the team. But I had to find a way to come through it. Hence, I had to go out on loan. I went out on loan to Grimsby, scored some goals. I went out on loan to Charlton, my first club, scored some goals. So it's a rebuild. Once I leave Forest and I go to Watford, I know we're come touch on that in a bit. It's a rebuild. I have to show people that it's not going to define me. I'm still a young person. I still want to have a career. We're not going to let a TV show and one individual ruin my life. I have to find a way. I've got mouths to feed. I still got ambition. For me, it was just about moving forward, showing resilience. Whether it was that or anything else, there was always going to be something. When you're playing sport or if you're a public figure, there's always going to be somebody who's going to want to critique you and they're going to want to ridicule you and they're going to want to make it difficult for you. So I've always been able to deal with whatever's thrown my way. Resilience is something that you have to build up, I think, if you're going to be a footballer. But same token is I do a lot of work with people and some people maybe shouldn't have to endure that. So that's why I talk about my situations. For some people, they shouldn't have to endure that. Why are we testing people's resilience to see if they're able to, to come through certain scenarios. It's just not fair. So we talk about, equality, diversity, and inclusive. How inclusive can we be? It's about doing a lot of work with a lot of people to give them a little bit better understanding, so there's no misunderstandings, especially in the workplace. And people always forget, like, football it's a great career, great job. You get well paid and this and the other, but it's still a job, and you're still going to work. So I'm always really frustrated when people leave their jobs to come watch football, but they leave their behaviours from work behind. They turn up into a football environment and stadium, and it's like anything goes. The things that are leaving their mouth and the things they say. Wow, you realise you couldn't do that, and you wouldn't be able to get away with that in your workplace, and yet you turn up to a football event, a social event, and you expect people to just put up with it. So it's once you break it down, you explain that to people. The amount of people I've done work with, once I've had these conversations with them, they're like, "Oh, I've got a better understanding, and I didn't really see it that way." Because generally, you come to football and you think, "Well, I paid my money, so therefore I should be able to do and say whatever I want." Well, actually, that's not the case. You still got to be respectful, and you got to behave yourself. And there are laws in place, and people need to adhere to that.
Yeah, absolutely, very true. And yeah, you see it so often, don't you, at football now in all HD. And I think as well, the thing is that you really were part of that first generation of footballers that actually so many footballers became household names so quickly after the kind of launch of the Premier League, didn't they? And I think that football probably just wasn't equipped to deal with that in probably the way that it's still always catching up. But the support networks in football now are probably so much better for young players, because all of this is going on. You're a 23, 24-year-old man, aren't you? You are still a young player.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I developed the tools, over the years, but I had to learn from my experiences. As I said, when I was playing Sunday league football and grassroots football, and there's still trouble at grassroots football, but if you can't get it right in a pro game, of course you're going to have problems in the grassroots, right? Because they image and they replicate what they're watching anyway. But when I was coming up playing grassroots football, you can imagine there was a lot of discriminatory behaviour, especially racism, and some games wouldn't even finish. That's just the reality of it. I used to play in Hackney Marshes back in the day, a very famous area in East London. 100 pitches every Sunday. I'm telling you, there was fights on whatever pitch it may be, and sometimes those fights would spill onto your pitch. So even if you wanted to continue your game, you couldn't continue your game. But yeah, it's a societal issue. We know that, but what we have to do is explain to people that football is still no different from your working environment. So it's not treated any different, and let's not expect players to have to put up with stuff that you wouldn't expect. People you were, and you've got nearest and dearest. People look at it this way: you've got your children. Your children play. What if your son or your daughter's a professional? Are you going to be happy with them receiving abuse? You're going to have to
Yeah,
look at it a little
yeah.
bit differently. And it's probably when you do have children, or if they're involved, that you do start to think, okay, maybe I have to behave accordingly and change my way, really.
And you mentioned that obviously the loan spells that you have away from Forest, eventually that time comes to an end at the City Ground with a permanent transfer to Watford. You mentioned rebuilding your career. You're going to work for Graham Taylor at that point as well. Actually, another person in football who really had to rebuild his career and his reputation actually from the spotlight. As I make that connection, I mean, what was Graham Taylor like to work for and with, and what was that spell at Watford like?
Brilliant. It was perfect. It was what I needed. I spoke to Graham. Again, Graham's history was at Lincoln, and a lot of people talk, so he knew about me anyway in terms of, the Midlands, and he followed my career. And I had some good opportunities, when I left Forest. Whatever people may think of me, I've never struggled to get a club. It was only until I was 30, I got to the age of 30, that I started to get free transfers. I was always bought and sold. So, there's always been interest, whether you're fighting relegation or trying to attain promotion. Teams always looked at somebody like myself and felt that I could help them. So with Watford and Graham going back in as manager, he's, iconic figure. He was hugely successful there in his first spell as manager. He was, I think, director of football. Then he took over the reins again. He was rebuilding the team. I was his first signing. I knew that obviously his spell as England manager, we know what the public ridicule that he had to deal with again. So one of our early conversations would have been about the fact that we've both had to endure, you know, public ridicule, and how do we deal with that and what are we going to do. So he was great for me. He explained to me the project. I was leaving the Premier League to drop down to League One. That got relegated from the Championship. He wanted to bounce back. He was building a team. Myself. He had young gifter Noel Williams, who was at the club, 17-year-old striker, who I mentored and still continue to support and help today. And he was bringing in Ronnie Rosenthal from Spurs. So that was going to be his front three. I had experience of playing at a high level. Ronnie did, and then we had this young player in gifted Noel Williams. So very forward thinking in the way he set the team up. Three up top, myself being the furthest man forward. He played with wing backs, played with three defenders. He played Tommy Mooney was a striker as a left-sided centre half, which was crazy. Nobody could get their head around it, but it worked really well. We had a really dynamic wing back in Peter Kennedy, who top scored that season. So he was getting up and down, but we had goals everywhere within the team. So when he's telling me about the project, and I felt really good that he wanted me to be part of that, and he wanted me to help rebuild the team and rebuild the club. I mean, he explained, I wasn't coming there to sit on my laurels. I was coming there to play a part in the history of Watford. So I look back on it with fond memories. He was great. I take a lot from Graham. He was extremely demanding. When I coached and I managed, I can remember you take good and bad things from a lot of coaches and managers, but his enthusiasm, his attention to detail are certainly some of the things that I was able to implement when I was working with people, because he left no stone unturned in terms of analyzing footage and video footage. And we had all the data before. We're data driven now. We're looking at all the analytical stuff and the data, but he was data driven. Even then, he was ahead of the curve. We had all our stats and our details up regularly on a Monday, whatever it may be. So if you weren't hitting certain levels, you weren't covering certain distances, that would pretty much curtail any conversation you wanted to have with the manager. So if you want to complain about this, that, and the other, just go and have a look at the stats. Your assists, your distance covered, and you can kind of see. And I went for a spell at Watford where I wasn't scoring, and he stuck with me because all of my stats and my data was actually very good apart from scoring. My assist was there. I was covering the distance. As I said, I always had that defensive duty, and I was a positive influence on the team, especially working with Ronnie, who was, Ronnie would literally do what he wanted. Ronnie always played with a free spirit. And then young Gifton, I would have to kind of help Gifton. He's still learning his trade. So he certainly appreciated what I could offer the side, and I certainly appreciated what Graham did for me. And I look back at that spell with Watford very fondly. We won the league at the end of the day. So when you win something, not many players win things. We all start the season with good intention. But yeah, not many teams can go out and be a champion. So to be a champion and win the league and to help that team bounce back, and then back-to-back promotions back into the Premier League, Watford, fantastic. Well done.
In the decade that follows your time at Watford, you represent Chesterfield, Northampton and Boston. Your three most successful spells, at least from a goal-scoring point of view, are at Peterborough, Notts County and north of the border at Falkirk as well. What are your memories of those spells, moving around, the move to Scotland as well? How did all that come about?
So Peterborough is Barry Fry again. So I played for him at Southend when I was a young player, and then I played for him as a 30-year-old at Peterborough. He was enjoying a bad spell. He'd been there maybe a year or two. He took over the club, bought the club for £1. You inherit and you take on the debts. So when people say you bought a football club for £1, yeah, there's more to it than that. It's been well documented that he remortgaged his house. He's a legend at the club now. He saved the club. But it was Marmite in those days, and I think he's always been perceived as being Marmite. But for me, I had a very good and still have a very good personal relationship with Barry Fry. So he's not a coach, he's a motivator. So his scouting network's excellent. He rang me on New Year's Day or just before New Year's. I'd been injured at Chesterfield, recovering from a cartilage operation. I had many meniscus operations, as you do over the years, and I wasn't fully fit. And he said, I desperately need you to come and help me out at Peterborough. I said, oh, well, I'm not 100% fit. I'm weeks away, really, to be honest. He said, I just need you in and around the club, in the changing room. We've got some good young players. We just need good leaders. And I think they was third bottom when I arrived on New Year's Day. So I went in a team. I wasn't fully fit, but straight away I was able to make an influence. I played up top with a guy called Andy Clark, who was at Wimbledon, who played Premier League football. We struck up a really good relationship. I scored in one of my first few games in a local derby against Northampton. That always helps you, bed in with a new set of fans. And then I did contribute and I scored some goals and we flew up the table, and we got into the playoffs and we wasn't favourites to go up and we beat Darlington in the final at Wembley. So great season, tick, 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 promotion, careers moving again. You have to take these chances sometimes. So I left Chesterfield, who was playing a league above, to go to Peterborough to help them get back into that league. So these are the things you have to back yourself. Did 3 years at Peterborough. Half of my time there, I was plagued with injury in terms of my knee. I ruptured my patellar tendon, which is a career-ending injury. Same one as the Brazilian Ronaldo, who did it twice. I was told I'd never play again. It was a traumatic experience. But I was dealing with patellar tendonitis for quite a period of time, and I was just managing it. So when I ruptured my patella, I thought, okay, well maybe my career is going to be curtailed at the age of 30. So I started to re-educate myself, went back to college, university, did my coaching qualifications. I've now got an eye on something else. I'm thinking about what am I going to do, which is what I do now anyway when I'm working with young players. I'm telling them you need to prepare for the eventuality for when your career ends. So half of my time at Peterborough, I was injured. Came to the end of my contract, free transfer for the first time in my career. I'm scratching around really for the first time because I've been out a long period of time, with injury. I did come back and play some games and score some goals, but people knew that I'd been out for a year. Plus, I'm the age of 30. Ageism kicks in. Not sure what you can do. Some of the offers I was getting, I could understand why clubs were offering me, reduced wages or dependent on my appearances and this that, and the other. I can understand that. But my perspective and my responsibility to my family is to get the best deal I can get and a little bit of security. So when Falkirk come in, Brian Rice was the assistant, who's a former Forest player. There's always a connection somewhere. He knew about me. He asked me, would I be interested in coming up the road to Scotland? And I thought, wow, really, Scotland? I'm not sure about that. I'd heard some horror stories, but I have to say my spell for Falkirk, and it was only one season. I signed a 2-year contract, but I did one season. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I played the game, scored some goals. The people of Scotland were fantastic with me. Just what I needed at that time. Kind of proved to a lot of people that I'm still fit and I'm okay and I've overcome my injuries. So I did the season. We was able to come to an agreement where I didn't have to do the second year, and I came back to England. Boston, Scottish manager in Steve Evans. He knew what I was about. Signed for Boston. Continued playing games and scoring goals. And you can see, that I'm back and I'm up and running. So I do eventually land at Notts County, which I should have signed for Notts County a few times, but ageism again, he's 30 plus. We don't really want to sign a player with no resale value. And I speak to a lot of young players about this now. They're going to have to deal with this. So you feel like you're having to prove to clubs that I've still got a lot to offer. I would average 40 games a season. The only reason I wouldn't play would be if I was injured or suspended. Invariably, if I was at a club would, if I was on the books at a club, they would really want to play me because I would have that influence. And if I wasn't playing, I wouldn't stay there. I would move on. Hence, that's why I played for a lot of clubs. I was never going to be the person to sit and just pick up my wages. And you train for a reason. You want to play games at a weekend. So Notts County was phenomenal for me. I signed for Notts County at 35. I signed a 2-year contract, which is unheard of. They only wanted to give me a year. I said, well, I want to. It's on my doorstep. I live in Nottingham. I'm going to want to do the city proud. I felt like I'm an adopted person from Nottingham. My children grow up here. I had already got a 2-year offer at Aldershot. So you need to match that. It wasn't about the money. It was about just having the belief in me in the same way I believe in myself. And Steve Thompson's the manager, somebody I mentioned earlier, former teammate, former manager. He knew he could trust me. So I went in there as club captain, team captain, played the game, scored goals, got 2 of the 3 awards, player of the season, fans. It was just what I needed, and I had a long career. I ended up playing till I was 38. I played till I was 41. I played in league till I was 38. That's not the norm. That's not the norm. So I always maintain I looked after myself physically, and I always had the motivation. Without the motivation to keep pushing yourself, you're not really going to be able to play, especially when you start dropping down the leagues because people do want to test you, especially if they know you've played at a high level, and rightly so.
And for, as you mentioned there, I mean, for a player who you thought your career may have ended at 30 to play into your 40s at Boston, which is where you transition then into a couple of seasons in the dugout, and you mentioned that you have been coaching for 10 years as well. How was that transition? Was there ever that temptation to a managerial career longer term?
You need opportunity again. I could see how and why I transitioned. I was coaching before I went back to Boston as player coach. I was coaching at Notts County. I literally had 3 tracksuits in my car, 3 work outfits at one stage. I was coaching at Notts County. I was coaching at Forest. I had my own soccer school, so I was always changing I was busier than ever. Playing football was easy when I was just playing and getting home, early afternoons. But now I'm in the real world, and I'm having to juggle 3 jobs. And then Boston asked me to come back as player head coach, alongside in the first scene alongside Lee Canaville. We did it joint to start with, and then I took on the reins on my own the following season. But I was already coaching, so you have to be prepared to apply and test yourself. I worked with all age groups, really enjoyed it. Being in a dugout felt natural to me. Always felt that I was a leader anyway, in terms of being a captain, being a strong role model in a club environment. So it was an easy adjustment. Like most coaches and managers, you end up getting the sack at some stage, which I did, which I'm not bitter about, but I'm still not happy about, because when I look back at it, you always want to look back and think, well, did they need to do that? Well, it was November. We was in 10th place. We'd won 7, drawn 7, lost 7. So yeah, that's inconsistent, but also you never know. Second half of the season, you could turn it around. But they felt that I'd not been able to move the team forward, and we was being inconsistent. So they decided that we was going to part company. You always get that mutual one. But as a coach and a manager, I just realized then that it's going to be difficult to be a coach and a manager, because you're reliant upon so many things. It's out of your hands. You can prepare the team in the best way possible, and then you can get to the game, and a defender could fall over and make a mistake in the first 30 seconds, and you're a goal down.
Yeah, yeah.
And being player manager is not ideal. I signed strikers. I signed players who I hoped would go and play. A lot of them was injured. Maybe they wasn't up to it. I ended up having to play, which was crazy. Didn't really want to do that in my first season as player manager. So yeah, it's just not easy. And I also realised that you have to do. And I work with a lot of coaches and managers. You have to have other irons in the fire, because you could be out of work more than you are in work as a coach and a manager. You,
Yeah,
you you get
yeah.
six months to a year if you're lucky. So what you're going to do with the rest of your time. You have to be able to go into something else. So I was always able to ensure administration and governance is something that I enjoy, and hence
Mm.
that's why I work for the PFA, and I've been working with them for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and that career path that you're now on. I mean, that's clearly something that your passion really comes through. You talk about it a lot in your podcast as well, and it really does seem like a superbly suited role for you. And do you think as well your career experiences took you down that path? Is that something that, or do you think it's a path you would have perhaps found whatever had happened in your career?
I think your life experiences and your career experiences are gonna obviously shape where you end up, and it's for me to stay in football is a bonus. For me to work in an EDI space is certainly something I think I can help others with my life experiences. But more importantly, I continue to do the work myself, so I'm learning all the time. So I never take anything for granted, because when we do, we stop evolving, and times have changed. So without being ageist, and I speak to a lot of people, especially around my age, we need to continue to do the work. We need to keep up to speed with different terminology. What young people are talking about now, because we become out of touch, and a lot of people will say, well, back in my day. Well,
Mm,
we're not back in your day anymore, unfortunately.
mm,
I've got
yeah.
children. I'm always learning and listening. You want to know what's going on. You don't want to be that person. So when I work with coaches and managers who are all of a similar age or whatever, I just want them to remain and to be, don't become out of touch, because that's when you become a little bit, yeah, you become not only out of touch, but you're then going to be struggling really to work with younger people, and you don't really want to
Mm,
be. I mean, great for somebody like Roy Hodgson, working into his 70s. I know he's just left Crystal Palace, but his enthusiasm for the game, unbelievable. And we shouldn't be putting people out to pasture because they're getting to a certain age. But he continues to do the work. He always turned up every day. His enthusiasm was there. He was able to relate and work with young people.
Mm.
That's a real plus. I think a lot of people should look at scenarios like that and think, great. If you want to enjoy your life, enjoy your work, and you can have, and lots of organisations are, but a lot more need to continue to have EDI training, cultural awareness, whatever it may be. Just do the work with your staff from a top-down approach and give people the tools they need to prevent any of these, inaccuracies, these stereotypes, and some of the issues you might have to deal with, through grievance and this and the other. A lot of the situations, a lot of things that happen can be avoided. And a lot of
Mm.
the excuse from people is ignorance and saying that, well, I didn't understand that and no one told me. So I think we should try and alleviate those excuses by doing as much work as possible with people and just giving them the tools to be able to flourish and create an inclusive, environment.
Absolutely, and it's always evolving as well. And I think that's the other thing. Only last night I was talking to a friend who's also a female sports broadcaster who's dealing with an awful lot of stuff. There's been obviously a great deal of furore and so on social media, especially about the women's game and women's broadcasters. I know you're a huge advocate of both the women's game and female broadcasters. Why is that so important to you?
Allyship's important. So when I talk to David Baddiel about being an ally for the Jewish community, I can do that. I'm prepared to take myself out of my comfort zone. I'm prepared to be an ally for the female pundit or female coaches or women in sport because they need that. The same way I need allyship. I need a white man to stick up for a black man. For somebody who's gay. I'm non-gay, but I will still go and stick up for somebody who's gay. This is what allyship's all about. Okay, it's very easy to just stay in your lane and keep a low profile, but the women's game has moved on. I sit on the FA Women's Board. Again, that's me doing extra work. 7 years I've sat on that board. Reason being, I want to see the women's game move forward. It's made great strides off the back of obviously the Lionesses being hugely successful, but there's still a lot of work to do. And there is a lot of sexism in football. Football isn't just for men, but a lot of men assume and have these beliefs that women shouldn't be involved in the game. I certainly don't agree with that, and I'll have these counter arguments with lots of men. I have these conversations. I'm in lots of WhatsApp groups with friends. I have on a professional basis where sometimes these misogyny and sexism, it comes out, and it will take somebody, it will take a man to say, look, I'm uncomfortable or I'm not okay with that. Maybe for another man to listen and say, oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm hearing it from a different perspective. So I just think we talk about being inclusive. The women's game is a fantastic game. We know it's a different game from the men's game. Same rules apply. It's played at a different speed, and we know the physicality. But it's not about critiquing. It's just about enjoying the women's game for what it is. And technically, they're
Mm.
extremely proficient, very professional. I've coached women. I've worked with young ladies and young girls in schools, and they're very keen and they do the work. And I've got daughters, and if you've got a daughter or if you've got a young child who wants to go and play football, come on, we need this environment to be a really good environment. You want to encourage them to go and play off the back of the Lionesses. More and more women, young girls are buying football shirts and they go into games. And it's a completely different environment when you go to a women's match.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a positive
Yeah.
environment. You're able to walk there, you take your children, you're not going to hear these profanities. Go to a men's game, you have to be guarded, you've got to be vigilant. It can go off at any moment. But we accept
Yeah.
that. We accept that.
Mm.
At a men's game, you still want to take your children, you still want to take women, your wives, daughters, whoever it may be, but you're more conscious and more wary of something might be said or something might happen. Well,
Mm.
clearly we've got a lot of work to do still. And we talk about that.
Yeah, I took my 10-year-old daughter at the time to Bramall Lane for the Lionesses semi-final against Sweden.
Brilliant.
And as you say, completely different atmosphere. Incredible. She doesn't actually have a huge interest in the men's game. There's always plenty of men's football and not, but actually because it was women's football, she was really keen on it. But one of the things that really struck me is that when the national anthems were about to begin, there was a guy who went to boo the Swedish national anthem, realised that nobody else in the stand was joining in, and then just immediately stopped. And it was nice to be that way round.
Yeah, you can just feel it. It's completely different. So I'm glad you went to that game. I went to all the Lionesses games, and I went to some of the other teams. Bramall Lane I went to, and the atmosphere was fantastic. It was really nice to see lots of people get behind and come out.
And obviously, we mentioned at the top of the show, you're still very a regular down at the City Ground doing your ambassadorial work. How are you feeling about the season at the moment? Obviously, as at the time of us recording this, it might be not go out for a few more weeks, but at the time of recording, Forest are sat outside the bottom three. Nuno's come in, had quite an impact. What do you think the prospects are? And obviously, there's a lot going on with FFP and deductions for various teams, and Forest teams kind of been mentioned in that and so on. I mean, how concerned are you, or do you think that actually, this is another real sustained spell for the top flight football for Forest?
I am concerned. I don't think I can be confident. I don't think anybody should be confident, because that would be a problem. I think if you think you're okay, especially in this league, in this level, you can become a cropper. So it feels very similar to last season, except for the first season back in the Premier League. You can imagine the enthusiasm, the atmosphere. We've bounced back, and we're back in. It's taken 20 odd years to get back there. Staying in the league is the hardest thing. So I think with 3 games remaining last season, Forest secured their safety in the Premier League. I'm hoping it doesn't go to that stage again this season, but it feels very similar. Nuno's managed to win 3 games. He won 2 when he first came in, then went for a spell where lost games, and just won a game recently, beating West Ham. You've got to build momentum. Forest need to win back-to-back games to start chipping away, and also the worry of FFP and a points deduction. Yeah, that's hanging over. That's not something that Forest can afford. Forest certainly can't afford to be dropping any points at any stage. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that works out. But Nuno's come in and done a good job. He'll be judged on the end of the season, really, if he can keep winning games and keep the team in the league. But I think the ambition has gone up at the club, because second season, you want to see progress. Everyone always talks about progress. They want to see themselves climb and maybe be mid-table as opposed to fighting relegation. That will give people a little bit more peace and confidence. But, I'm studying sports directorship, in terms of being director of football and doing stuff in and around that. Clubs invariably end up with what they spend. Clubs who don't spend as much end up in the bottom tier of the Premier League. So it's like that for a reason. Clubs have built up years and years of finances. Forest are new to the Premier League. Yes, they spent some money in the first season, especially in the first window. Everyone was going crazy about it. 22 new players came into the club. It was unheard of, but that had to happen. So, they have slowed down in the windows. I think 10 players went out in this window, and some, players go out, players come in. You need to be bringing in better quality of players as you stay in the Premier League. But then with the better quality of players, the better contracts, there's that concern that what happens if you do drop out of the Premier League? You're left with these players who you can't move on. So financial fair play is there for a reason, and everyone needs to adhere to it. Everyone knows what the rules are. I just don't know how the powers be you're going to look at that. You still got Man City, that's still ongoing. And then, as you said, you've got other clubs. You've got Everton who are dealing with it. They may well get deducted some more points, and they're fighting it as well. So Sean's done a really good job down at Everton. I think he's built that siege mentality. But Luton, they've got a really good fighting spirit. They're not over it. I think Burnley are struggling. I think if they don't change, which they won't change, Vincent has been very stubborn, and this is the way he wants to play. I think the way he wants to play will take them back down. It's whether they give him the opportunity to come back up. And yeah, I think ourselves and Everton, we've still got to be looking over our shoulders. We've got a lot of work to do. Luton are showing a fighting spirit. I think Sheffield United are struggling. I think Sheffield United and Burnley will go. and it'll just be down to the other 3 or 4 teams above them to try and secure their safety. So I think it's going to go to the wire.
Well, Jason Lee, you're a hero in the Red of Forest, making 63 Premier League appearances and scoring 12 goals, assisting 5. You had a professional career of more than 600 games, scoring over 100 goals. For anyone who's not watching, you are sat in a room. I can see 1 or 2 framed shirts and medals behind you. We've probably covered quite a few of them, but what are the highlights for you looking back on your career?
Being a pro in the first instance, when I meet scholars, first thing I say to scholars, because I consider them to be pros, once you sign a scholarship at 16, as I said, I made my debut at 17. Owen's done it. Wayne Rooney's done it. Lots of young players. You're in the building. Congratulations, well done, because young people are going into academies at 6. I mentioned that earlier. For them to stay in the system until they're 16, what an achievement that is. Probably at 10 years already in the system. So you're then trying to, get contracts and be a pro. You're judged every couple of years. You need to get another contract. It's a difficult environment to stay in. So I always look back on that and think, getting a pro contract, getting my scholarship, getting a pro contract, making my debut, playing for so many teams, being bought, being sold, 4 promotions, winning something with a group of players is what you hold dear, So mementos, I've only had these shirts up the last few years, it's taken forever. I don't know why, but I suppose when you're playing, you don't really think about it. But, I thought I need to get these shirts up and I need people to see and I need to share it with people. And I should be proud of my career, and I am proud, but it's not something that you kind of flaunt or you talk. So lots of the teams we spoke about and the cup run, I've got those shirts from the Forest European Cup run. I've got those shirts as well. Yeah, they're just little reminders, really. And people come to the house and it's only ever they'll see it, they'll ask questions, we'll have conversations, and I do podcasts and people ask about shirts. And no, it's good to do. Listen, we worked hard. It wasn't easy, lots of ups and downs, but I look back on my career and I'm really proud of what I did and what I achieved. So I'm happy.
Fantastic, absolutely superb. And you mentioned your podcast. Well, what you got coming up on that? It's great. You've had some great guests already.
You've plugged it really well without realising. You keep saying the word absolutely, and what a great word it is, because it's an absolutely great podcast. No, we did season 1. That's finished, and we got nominated for a few awards, which was really fantastic because we're up against some really big hitters, established organisations, and yeah, we're thinking about season 2. Really, if anyone's listening, I certainly need sponsorship. We need these podcasts. I don't know how you fund yours, but we was doing ours in the studio, and yeah, we need sponsorship. We need funding. Yeah, we want to do season 2. We want it to be really good, and we want it to be the best it can. But you've seen, there are a lot of podcasts out there and a lot of people have got some huge financial backing. So to compete with that is not easy. But I just enjoy the space. I'm sure you do, having the opportunity to speak to people, some great people, listen to their stories and giving them the opportunity to share what it is, and especially if something's topical. So no, it's good stuff, Carl. So I've really enjoyed speaking with you today. Good luck with your continued podcast. I know it can be difficult, but no, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing me on.
Thank you, Jason. Been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, Jason Lee. So that was Jason Lee. What a lovely, lovely guy. I really, really enjoyed my chat with Jason. He is such a gentle soul. He is so, I think, compassionate around the things that have gone on for him and how he doesn't want that to happen to anybody else. But there's also still, I think, that passion and that fury and that rage that actually is still burning under there, that actually he went through such injustices, I think, at a time when he was still developing as a person, as a player. And if you listen to one episode of the Absolute League podcast, it has to be the David Baddiel episode. He's forensic in the way that he holds Baddiel to account for what he and Frank Skinner did to him back in the mid-90s. It's a fascinating listen, and I would really, really recommend it. As ever, all of the links you need for today's show are in the description, including how to leave a review, all of the social media channels. If you want to support the show via buymeacoffee.com, the link is found in that description as well. That is it for this week's show. Next week's show, I have the broadcaster, the journalist, the author, Jim White on the show, a huge Manchester United fan himself. We talk about that quite a bit. He's written some fantastic books, including A History of the Premier League in 10 Matches. We talk about that in quite a lot of depth as well. It is a brilliant book. If you enjoy this podcast, I would highly recommend you go out and find that book as well. We break all of that down. He's a fantastic guest. He picks his deserted island matches, and that is coming up next week. Until then, though, thank you so much for listening to the show. As ever, I really, really appreciate your support. Thank you for sharing it. I'll be back next week with Jim White, Deserted Island Matches. I'll see you then.